Okay, welcome to Mechatronics Introduction to Tables as part of our shop math course, or um, measurement and calculation course as it's officially known. And today we're going to talk about tables. Tables are the core for most real work in the industrial world, whether that be construction or manufacturing. Tables usually include all the core knowledge that's been pre-calculated for you so that you can rapidly look up the information you need without needing all the math. So tables are your rule of thumb for technicians and engineers all over the world all the time. So what I'd like to do is introduce a four-step process to make sure that you're using tables properly. So let me just get going here and share my screen. Okay. So today we're going to talk about what I call my Rob's rules for using charts and tables. And there's basically four rules that I'm going to introduce. The first rule, and probably the single most important rule, is make sure that you have the right table. You're going to carefully check the title, you're going to check the results, and check the results that you want and the unit of measure you want with the variables, the values of the data in that table. So you want to match it up properly. Here in the educational world, we often provide you the table, so we take away that uncertainty. But in the real world, you will run into that as a problem, an area for potential mistakes. So you really want to check that first. Secondly, you're going to check out the X and Y axis. In other words, the heading on each column and the first column, which is the row heading, to make sure that you're going to get the data that you want and you're using the right unit of measure. Third, this is where you're actually starting to use the table. You want to select the column and or row, but it's usually selecting the column first most of the time, where you're picking the data that you already know. So you select the column for the data that you already know. Then fourth, you have potential two things you can do. Sometimes the data that you know, the second component of the data you know, is in the table, right? And if that occurs, you're going to pick the best matching cell in that table to match what you're looking for. And then you're going to look to the left to find the answer that you want, the information that you're looking up. And then you will use that information to come up with the results. And I'll give you an example of that. In other cases, you will select a row and a column and then look up the information you're looking for in the cell itself, in the table itself. So it depends on how that data, what you're looking for versus what the information is in the table. So that's a little bit confusing to just talk about it, so let's run through a couple examples. So my first example, and let me just turn on my little highlighter here. My first example, and I recognize this is a little bit blurry, is we're going to talk about lumber. Lumber, if you are building a house, one of the first things you have to do is figure out how big you can make your rooms. Based on the lumber that you have, you want to make sure that you don't try to span a gap with a piece of lumber that's going to break. If somebody walks up on that platform, will that span break or will it hold up? Or more specifically, in real world construction, will it bounce around too much and too flexible? Or will it be sturdy enough that you're comfortable in that room space? So for that purpose, anytime you build any house, they give you a lookup table based on the kind of lumber that you're using, and the size, the dimension of the lumber that you've chosen, they'll give you the maximum span that that joist, that piece of wood, we call those joists when they are in the floor, can span. So let me stop my share. Let's flip the camera. And let's show you why this is important. So this is me with my little drawing of a house that's in construction. It's rather silly of me not to build my house on flat ground, but here I did it. And so I've got two walls that I built, and now I've got a bit of lumber that I've started building on the top of those walls. So before I finish my construction, I want to verify that my 2x10, right, my 2x10 is going to be sufficient for the span that I've chosen. So I want to know what my maximum span is if I'm using a 2x10 construction lumber. So let's flip my camera and share my screen again. Okay, so here's the problem. What is the maximum span for my deck joist using spruce, pine, fir? Because I know this is what they call SPF, which is just basic generic lumber, 2x10 boards. And here's a little bit of data that you need to know as well. I'm using a standard 16-inch on center, which is pretty much standard for any construction here in the United States. You're going to find typical 16-inch center for all of your joists and your wall studs and that sort of thing. So that's a little extra bit of data that you probably didn't know unless you do a little construction, but anybody in construction knows. So you have a 16-inch on center span. So step one, all right, and here's where I'm gonna step out of the sharing mode, and we're gonna share the active screen. Okay, so step one, do I have the right table? So step one, let me just grab my step one up here. Let's check to make sure that this table has all the important information that I need to answer this problem. So at the top, the table says deck joist spans for common lumber species. And then it's got another critical bit of information, which is my unit of measure, foot and inches. So the spans in the table are in unit of measure of feet and inches. Good. I'm in the US. We don't have the metric system yet, maybe never. So everything is in foot and inches. So when I read the data in the table, I know it'll be foot and inches. Sometimes you can't see this information easily and obviously, but almost always with a decent table, you'll find it mentioned somewhere in the title or right beneath the table. The second thing I want to do is make sure that the table content has what I'm looking for. So on the left side, it gives me a different set of species of wood. So I've got one section for southern pine. Am I using southern pine? Nope. It's got another section for Douglas fir, hemlock fir, or spruce pine fir. Whoop, spruce pine fir, that's my board. And then there's a bottom section with redwood. Who uses redwood? I don't know. So I know that it's showing me the spacing of deck joists with no cantilever and with cantilever. I'm not going to go into what a cantilever is, but we're going to assume no cantilever if I don't mention a cantilever. So yes, this table is indeed going to give me the data I'm looking for. So step three, choose the right column, right? So we talked about no cantilever and cantilever. We know we're in the no cantilever column. Here I have three choices for sizes of the spacing of deck joists. I've got 12-inch, 16-inch, and 24-inch. We know it's inches because I can see in the title it says inches. We know that we've got a 16-inch joist spacing, which is the standard spacing for almost all joists in the United States. So we know this is my column. So all I have to do is step 4, pick the cross section between my joist size and species and select the span. So let's insert a little bit of a circle to highlight the answer. So I go down this column right here, and over here as under SPF, I've got a 2 by 10. That's one right there. So I'm going to circle this answer here. Actually, let me fix that shape fill so you can see that there's the answer in the air. So the answer I've selected is 13-7, which really means, because I know I looked at the unit measure earlier, 13 foot 7 inches. So my maximum span is 13 foot 7 inches. And that's step 4. All right, pretty simple. Number 1, check to make sure you got the right table. Number 2, check to make sure all the data matches the data you have versus the data you want. Step 3, pick the right column. Step 4, either look in the left column to choose the right row or choose the right data point in the table, and then look to the left to choose the right answer in the column on the left. So